Hi everyone, thank you all very much for coming. I'm Tara Willerup and you're here at the Simsbury Free Library. And tonight is the first night of a 5-night series. I'm so excited to try to share more Simsbury news and stories with you. And please feel free to ask any questions and bring questions with you. You have a syllabus so you know what we're going to be talking about on the day. But this is all about what you guys want to know. We'll tell you what we know, but we're happy to hear what you might have questions on and what you know, because you are all very knowledgeable in Simsbury as it is. Tonight we have Jim Flynn speaking to us and TJ Donahue, and they will be talking about the library and some of the people who were instrumental in making it happen. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Tara. Hi, everybody. I'm Jim Flynn. As Tara indicated, it's my great honor to be the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Simsbury Free Library. And frankly, we love talking about the library. It's such a great place. Historic building, amazing characters involved over the century and a half that we've been around. And so we're thrilled to get the opportunity through continuing education to bring in folks who are interested in it. Just to underscore what Tara said, if you have questions or information or, you know, hey, you're crazy, that never happened, just raise your hand. We'll make it into a bit of a conversation, okay? And I see, I don't know if someone was taking notes or just writing down a grocery list, but I can easily send you copies of the PowerPoints we're going to use tonight. We're going to use 2 PowerPoints, the way we'll proceed. Skipping back and forth a little. They overlap a teeny bit, but I think you'll understand why. And we're also going to include a little tour around the library, the building itself, and a lot of the artwork and artifacts, et cetera, that we have. So to get started, if you'll excuse me, I kind of have to sit down. I have a sciatic nerve that reminds me a lot of how old I am. Anyway, that's the library without the snow on it. We all remember that. The library's been around for quite some time. Founded in 1874 by a gentleman named Amos R. Eno, who was a native of Simsbury, but was in business here locally for several years, and then ultimately moved down to New York, where he made tons of money as a real estate developer. And we're going to talk a lot more about him in the context of the Eno family in a few minutes. What he did was to simply give money to 10 local people, and he established a charitable trust for the purpose of establishing a library. He didn't want it named after him. He just wanted to make books available to the people in the town. Now, 1874 is a number, but that's quite a while ago. And just to put that in perspective, real quick, who was the president?
Johnson.
That would have been my guess, but it was U.S. Grant. I did look it up. And there were 37 states in the Union, and the population of Simsbury was about 2,200 to the best we can figure out. Now, it's called the Free Library because at that time, most libraries were subscription libraries. Put some money in, you kind of joined that elaborate book club. But Eno and some other folks established this free library kind of concept. And, you know, if you go to Avon, it's the public library is the free library. Philadelphia is the free library. So you see that terminology. And that was there from the beginning to distinguish them from the other type of library. De facto, though, was the public library, right? And there are people in this room who, you know, born and raised here and came here, this was the public library. But the town grew a lot from 2,200 people to whatever it was in 1970. And the library being a private foundation, no government support whatsoever, much as we ask, no government support whatsoever. And therefore, it just became too much. So in the 1970s, the town began to give the Free Library financial support, as I understand it. And then in the 1980s, they built the predecessor, I guess, of that beautiful building down the street, and the town took over the public library function, if you will. Now we have I guess we'll call it a collegial relationship with the public library. In fact, recently we jointly celebrated the concept of 150 years of reading in Simsbury. We had a lovely affair over there, an ice cream social, et cetera, that the public library hosted. But again, there's no real connection between the two anymore. We still get people walking in the door thinking they're in the public library. The phone rings, but we tried hard over the last several decades to kind of get our brand out there as something different from the public library. And as I think I observed that day when we had the joint session, there are a lot of towns in Connecticut that can brag to having a good library. Well, Simsbury is kind of special because we have two, right? So we're fortunate in that regard. Now the building itself, it was constructed or finished in 1890. And Amos R. Eno, who had given the seed money to the trustees in 1874, really came forward and donated the land that this building is on and paid for the building. And again, it's owned by the charitable trust. The architect was a fellow named Melvin H. Hapgood, who I take it at the time was a very prominent local architect. The library building was expanded greatly in the 1920s when that wing, which we'll walk through in a little while, was added, courtesy of one of Amos R. Eno's children, Antoinette Eno Wood, and you probably know her from her donation that established Eno Hall. Of course, it's on the U.S. and Connecticut registers of historic places, and architecturally, I think it's known as something like a colonial revival style, influenced by early American Renaissance and Federal styles. I'm not sure I know what that means, but it's a very lovely building. Now, TJ is now going to take us on a little tour of the building with emphasis on some of the artifacts and paintings and books and all that. Ready to roll, T?
Sure. Very happy. And it's great to have you all here tonight. The building tells its own story. It's a very historic family. They were Puritans. They came from England. The Enos came to the United States in 1620, 1640, like so many in the Great Migration. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But this place is resplendent with Enos. Over the fireplace, you'll see a picture of Lucy Phelps Eno, and that's a portrait that was done by Eastman Johnson. And if you look up Eastman Johnson, at some point when you read through his history, you'll say that he was known as the American Rembrandt. But he was no doubt one of the leading portraitists in the United States of America, and that was a painting of Lucy Phelps Eno. Lucy Phelps Eno was Lucy Phelps. Lucy Phelps' father built this 1820 house. Amos Eno married into that and ended up with the house as a summer house, which has a lot of history to it, which we'll get into a bit too. This is Amos Eno too. This is Amos R. Eno. And these guys lived in the Gilded Age, and the reason they had big pictures of nice houses was that's what you did with money. You didn't get a 300-foot yacht. You invested in fine art, and not only that, you also invested in philanthropy, which they did. That is an Amos R. Eno portrait above the door here, and that's also reputed to be an Eastman Johnson picture. If you want to get up, we'll go for a quick walk around and look at some stuff and then get back to it.
So this building originated as what?
This building was built as a library. And what was built as a library was, see the metal work there?
Mm-hmm.
That was the whole building. And another Eno gave the back building the second part of the building. Okay, so there's Amos R. Eno. And this is an interesting exhibit. This is the William Phelps Eno Center. And this is a remnant of his offices. He was the father of transportation studies in the United States of America. He's one of the most reputed ones in the world.
I thought maybe I could use some of this information in my little tour.
Did he be one of the first tracks?
I remember it all, so.
Yeah, what he's most known for, are you all set back there? What he's most known for is the traffic circle, or the roundabout. And, you know, they just finished getting the roundabout together to be a roundabout, but the traffic circle was his innovation. What happened was, he was born in Simsbury, he grew up in New York City. When he traveled, when he traveled, which is another thing that wealthy people did, was they traveled to Europe and beyond on the steamships and stuff, and that's part of where he got his great focus on traffic studies. But he realized that traffic was chaos, and there were no rules of the road. So he invented the rules of the road, and we'll spend some time on that, and if you read that plaque sometime when you're here, that talks about his rules of the road, and it was simply go on the right, come back on the left, and
We're going to do a lot of, almost a whole separate thing on him, because he's not that well known, but he really is at the time, he was a world-renowned figure. I mean, the obituary on the front page of the Times and all like that.
And he consulted with the heads of state, with the leaders of the European society. He was very highly regarded. And he smoked. That's his own portrait. And that tells you two things. That tells you that smoking was elegant at that time, and that it was not thought of as we think of it as such a great risk today. Okay, we'll take a walk through here on the way through. These are all artifacts of his. He lived in New York City. He did all his work in New York City. Today, the Eno Foundation is in Washington, D.C., but for a long period of time, it was in Saugatuck, Connecticut on the river, and he had a mansion. When they took the mansion for condos, we got this stuff. So, we're standing here today because these people were very, very successful, very significant in Simsbury, and they were very, very generous. All the other, we'll go through the pictures. That guy on the wall there is Lucius Barber. I'd like to tell you he was a prize fighter, but he was part of the EV company or something at some time. What? Oh, and this exhibit here, what we do is we gather kindred spirits and people who have a mission or something to show us. And there's one expert on the Farming Canal that went from New Haven to Northampton, Massachusetts. And the expert is Carl Walter. And this is a model that he built himself by hand, piece by piece. Please take a look at that. But this is a model of that section. You can see the towpath. So this is an elevated water canal and towpath. And this was over the Farmington River in Avon, very close to where you take the right to go to Avon Old Farm School, but a little further south than that. But take a walk around that. It's worth it. And we should, to honor Carl Walter.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole story unto itself. We have a series of, 12 maps with narrative, but, well, I was thinking of the printout with the narrative and the story of it all right here, so. Anyway, just,
But that's the-
on the back
He's got the
side.
maps that take you from New Haven all the way to Northampton.
Town by
All the way to
town.
Massachusetts.
It's an extraordinary work.
And
It doesn't get-
Absolutely, what an amazing job he did.
He, if anyone talks about the canals, you mention Carl, because he knows everything. Mark, you've been to a lot of Carl's things. He knows everything there is to know about the canals, and he is such a wealth of knowledge. He will be speaking here, I think, at the end of March.
They had canals because they didn't have the normal roads we used to?
No,
No?
They couldn't
they
handle
built
the
the
same-
canal to try to steal, just steal the business away from New York and Boston.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but the preferred, like railroads are preferred over roads, and canals are preferred because it takes less energy to move freight further that way. And
I
so it was a significant competitive advantage. This was the age of canals. This is when they were building canals in Europe, and this is also the period of
How
time
did the age of
when they built the canal,
canals
the Erie Canal.
How did the age of canals compare to like the age of railroads?
Railroads won.
Railroads won. They put all the canals out of
The
business.
Farmington Canal was privately built, lasted maybe, I can remember, 10 or 15 years, they went bankrupt. It was not a great idea.
then the railroads
They
came.
overestimated the amount of commerce that they could draw from inland Connecticut down into the harbors. But
The
believe
technology
me,
of the canal was horse-drawn, and the
Yeah.
railroad was a fabulous engine with great power, like General Electric used to make. That could move freight cheaper, better.
the canal itself, if you go to Canal Place in Avon, there's still a little remnant of the canal. And what shocked me was how small it is. I mean, it's like 10, 12 feet wide.
Yeah, they weren't that big.
But it's fascinating because it follows the land, and in order to avoid building a lot of locks, it just follows the lay of the land. So there's like a 20-mile stretch without locks along the flat. And that's why you have some crazy curves around here, because the canal came into Avon and they had to adjust the level, and then it went right up, I guess, the street out here, right?
It's time to go back to work, but one thing, one thing you'll never find is a canal going over a mountain.
That's a quick question. The picture over there, is that Harriet Beecher Stowe's twins?
Those are ensign.
Okay.
They're ensigns.
This
Because I
pic-
know her twins live down the street.
Yeah, they had the house down the street. We don't have much with them, but
This picture is a picture of Harriet, this picture on this wall, that's Harriet Beecher Stowe, and that's a gift from Antoinette, Wood to us.
but yeah, but those little ones are. So yeah,
And they live, her sister lived right down the street,
yeah.
where the Gather is, or the place
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, that's where the twins are, yeah.
A lot of people came out here to spend the summers in Simsbury back then, because we had the river, we had the mountains, we had things that people could do in less congested than the city. So it always.
You had all these little railroad systems around here at the time, like by the
Yep.
old one-way fair, that little.
And through Terrifil.
Back to work, Jimmy.
If anyone has
You're not gonna get downstairs?
TJ,
Is
no,
it too,
that's another day.
okay, that works.
If anyone would like a snack or water, please feel free.
And just to fill in a little more biographical stuff, Amos and Lucy had 9 children, I believe. 7 lived to be adults, and we'll hear about, you already heard about some of them. TJ showed you some of the valuable paintings. We're all familiar with the famous American sculptor Remington. See that? Unfortunately, that's not a Remington. It's some guy in West Haven, and it's made out of lead, but, it looks pretty good. Well, of course, we have a mission statement. Everybody does. And it's pretty succinct. We try to live by it. And that is to try to connect people through genealogical research, which is probably our core competency, historical and cultural programming, which we try to do a lot of, and try to foster community belonging. I mean, I won't read the vision or the values, but things we'd like to see, hard to argue with, aspirations. Now, what is inside this building? And this sometimes is hard to explain, because the Free Library is a library. It's a research library, not a circulating library. It's also kind of a museum, and we like to use it as a community center. Hence things like tonight, or having other not-for-profits in for their meetings, that sort of thing. A beautiful building. We like to try to make it available in the community. We emphasize, in connection with genealogy, certain individuals and families. The Enos are the prime example, but we'll talk about some others. Clearly, biggest thing of recent times is the Martin Luther King in Connecticut Memorial, which is out there buried in the snow, but we'll have a whole presentation on that, I think, later in the course. TJ just briefly went through the William Phelps Eno Memorial Center. We're going to talk a lot more about him in a second. Ensign Bickford. Everybody knows Ensign Bickford down the road. They've been in town for, 175 years, a long time. They were here before this library even was established. And we had their archives downstairs. And of course, you saw some of the paintings, artifacts. And Phelps Eno's correspondence is fascinating, because you can open up a book and it's something written to a senator, or it's dear Will, good to see you the other day, blah blah blah. So these were very influential people. Quick word on genealogy, and we're going to have a whole session on this. The idea here is to help everybody from someone who knows nothing about it to some experts. I mean, there are people who really take this seriously, and we have expertise in the person. What's our current library? Allison Watson-Matson is a tremendously knowledgeable person on genealogy. She has conducted genealogy workshops for us. And of course, on the internet, for a long time now, you've had Ancestry.com. We have the library edition. I know it's more expensive. I don't know that it does us a lot of good more than the home version, but that comes in handy. And of course, back there are a lot of those volumes are family records, more localized Connecticut, Simsbury type of stuff. Just to worry about the books, we didn't talk about that. In the 1950s, or I should say the 1980s, when the public library took over and we were no longer a circulating library, we had a lot of books left over. So some of them went down the street, but others stayed here. So if you're interested in a sample of what people were reading between the 1890s and the 1950s, this is it. Lots and lots of travel books, because people couldn't travel. A lot of adventures, novels about exotic places. So we've kept them up just to keep the atmosphere consistent with the history. TJ just took you briefly through the William Phelps Eno Transportation Center. Again, he is the father of traffic regulation and transportation engineering. And he basically devoted his adult life, or his latter part of his adult life, to trying to make things much better for people who drove cars, even though, ironically, he never drove a car himself, even though he lived till 1945. He was an original trustee of the library, his father having founded it, and you saw a lot of the original works and artworks, etc. over there. Now, at this point, well, as TJ mentioned, an international expert. There are news articles from Paris and Berlin where he was, feted for his knowledge. And let's bear with me now for a second, and I'm going to switch to another PowerPoint.
The grandkids.
Uh-huh. Yeah, they're great. Okay, T, you want to take over? This beginning part is a lot about the Eno family.
As I said, they were Puritans, and they migrated to the United States of America in 1620 to 1640 during the Great Migration. Has anybody ever heard of the Great Migration? And what's it mean to you? Indians? The Great Migration, in my vocabulary, was the Indian nations when they were expelled or they had to move. But the Great Migration that we're talking about here was a migration when King Charles became the King of England. The Great Migration in 1620 began and ran for 40 years, where people came to this country, the Puritans came to this country seeking religious liberty. And
Excuse me, just a minute. Did you turn your mic?
no.
Sorry.
So they traveled here with the Great Migration, and they founded court towns in Connecticut and Massachusetts, and it largely stopped only after the English Civil War began. The Great Migration directly produced the founding populations of Windsor, Hartford, Wethersfield, and Simsbury. And many Simsbury elite families descend from these early migrants, including the Enos, the Phelps, the Hoskins, the Cases, the Humphreys, and others. But you can see that these are all the streets that are named around here, so that's who these people were, and that's how they got here. There's a treatise, Robert Charles Anderson, the author of the Great Migration Study Project, which has significant details on that for anybody who's interested. The key facts are that 20,000 immigrants arrived here in New England. They're mostly Puritan, and it was stopped after the English Civil War began. But you can see on this chart that William Phelps Eno was born in 1858 and died in 1945. Amos Richards Eno, who is our benefactor and the main deal for Simsbury, was married Lucy Jane Phelps, who's there, and they were sired by those other Phelps and Eno families, all Puritans. Next. So Amos R. Eno, born in Simsbury November 1st in 1810. At 16 he goes to Hartford and learns how to be in the dry goods business, and after like a merchant. And after a few years returned to Simsbury to open a store at Hoskins Station, which is at the north end of town. 23 he sold the store in Simsbury, and 1833 coincided with that period of time after the completion of the Simsbury Canal up to that North Station there, which means he realized that that business was gone because they built it and they sit in it and they were going somewhere else to get their dry goods. He went to New York City. He established Eno and Phelps with his cousin, and at age 25 he married Lucy Jane Phelps, and he became one of the greatest real estate investors in the United States. He invested in New York City real estate. He acquired large blocks of land in the vicinity of Fifth Avenue and the 20s and on Madison Square. That parcel includes the land where the famous Flatiron building is.
And there's a picture of that in the next wing there if you didn't see it.
And at age 47, he sold the dry goods business and he paid full attention to real estate. And he opened the Fifth Avenue Hotel, which was one of the largest, most profitable buildings going. And as we see in the next slide, I think, he died as one of the most successful merchants and wealthiest landowners in New York City. Now that's William Phelps Eno, who's later seen with a cigarette in the other end of the hall.
I think if he were here today, he would get that picture out of the files. I don't know.
I think so, yeah. Next. And he's talking here about his recollection in the beginning of his expertise of traffic studies and traffic movements and traffic expertise that it's of interest. My first recollection of traffic confusion was when I was 7. One day I drove to my father's office with my mother in an open carriage. And on returning home, we were caught in a traffic jam on Broadway. It took at least a half an hour to get out of it. In those days, many years before the motor car, it seemed as though a dozen vehicles could cause a blockade, since neither drivers nor police knew anything about the control of traffic. The only rule, if such be called, then in existence was that if you meet another vehicle, you were supposed to keep to the right. This simple rule was not enough. So that's from this book. And then he talks about sailing to Europe in 1867.
Still as a kid, you know?
Still as a kid, with further observations that in the spring of '69, when we visited England, the first thing I noticed was the efficient control of traffic, which even at that time existed. The police were well trained and the drivers knew their duties. They had no printed regulations.
As opposed to Paris, where he thought it was chaotic like New York.
But this is more evidence that they traveled freely to Europe on the great steamships, because that's what you did with wealth if you had great wealth. You had art, and you traveled, and you had books about travel. And then New York City in 1870, I don't think I ever went on the streets of New York nor any other city or town without being astonished at the stupidity of drivers, pedestrians, and police.
Now, talk about being timely. A lot of this material comes from this book, which was put out by the foundation that William Phelps Eno started, and TJ is going to talk about that in a second.
He matriculated at Yale, 1877. With these families, with those families of the Puritans who came here and came to New England, they were a tremendous influence on Yale, and that group is still a very significant Yale component and a significant aspect of Yale University. From '84 until '88, I was most of the time in my father's office in New York, being concerned principally with real estate, although all of the time I was wondering whether anybody would do anything about traffic. Nobody did. And then New Century, New Endeavors, and this ship is on the wall in the back up there.
That's a Keo, I think it was called, 127 feet long. And I believe I've read that he, as an adult, went to Europe 7 or 8 times, crossing the ocean on that. And I don't know, 127 feet is kind of long for a Mystic, but I don't know about the North Atlantic. But the kind of dollars they had, to T's point.
Yeah. And I guess, against my point, is they didn't give it all away. They had some nice things as well. He was also got some kind of medal from Venezuela or somewhere where there was an earthquake of significant damage, and he and fellow buddies at the New York Yachts Club in Larchmont packed up the boat, took supplies down on several trips. And these are just rules of the road, number 1.
Yeah, and his great claim to, or his great breakthrough was prior to this time, the police were not involved in traffic at all. It just, you know, every man for himself, et cetera, et cetera. And because he had this fixation with traffic, because he knew what the hell he was talking about, and because I think because he's a pretty rich, influential guy, politically, they were able to get the New York City Police Department to issue the first traffic regulations. And then I think in Washington and Detroit, they followed suit. So he really was the one who pushed the things that we, you know, take for granted every day now. There's a copy back there of a printout of the rules. I think Tara's going to pick it up.
This is the very small one, but this one that they printed back then was small enough to fit in your pocket. And he printed it and gave it to the police, and they gave it out to everybody. So it's just kind of interesting because it, you guys don't pay attention, but it kind of gives you the sense of he was really done with the chaos.
Yeah, and I mean the things he came up with or had codified are pretty straightforward. You know, one-way streets, stop signs.
That's one of the original signs too. There are a couple blue signs that you might see around, and those were original signs that he had made that we remade. There's one right out, slow moving traffic, I can't get read from here because I'm off the right.
Crosswalks, pedestrian islands. And as T mentioned, his big focus was on rotaries. He saw normal intersections with a light as being crazy. That was much quicker if you went in a rotary. There aren't that many rotaries around here, at least that I see. I think if you go over to Massachusetts or even down to New Jersey, and I happened to be in Long Island last week on the North Fork of Long Island, and there's one kind of main road that I've been on many times, and I noted that in the 2 places where there used to be a light, they're installing rotaries. So his idea has really caught on. That's Columbus Circle, and I went to school in that area, and I walked by there a lot of mornings. His idea was to make the traffic go in one direction. It's crazy enough in one direction. I can't imagine what it would have been like if it was just bearing right around and the other guy bears right. It'd be total chaos.
But the new roundabouts are his original invention, but that you could come in and stop and go into it. But the new roundabout concept is that you change the lanes, that you curve the lanes so they slow the traffic, and then you feed them in a single lane so that you can continuously move much more traffic. They've been proven to be extremely effective. And Jim, I know you don't get out much, but if you go to Bradley Field in the back road, you'll have 3 roundabouts.
That's the one, yeah. I've noticed that one up there. All right, let me talk about the Battle of Verdun for a second. And the Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, which is awarded to William Phelps, which brought me the question of, how does a New York real estate guy wind up getting a medal from the French government for helping them win the First World War when he had no military connection with either the U.S. or France? And the answer is pretty straightforward. Verdun was a very special place for the French. You may know more about this than I do, but it's about 160 miles northeast of Paris. It's over here where Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany all meet with France. And it was a city that had a lot of history. And the French really, since the beginning of the war, said, we're not going to let anybody pass here. They shall not pass. That was the cry at Verdun. Well, the German general in charge of the German attack had the idea that if he attacked Verdun and bogged down with the French, and I think there are 3 different fortresses in Verdun, at least 2, and they got into a war of attrition, that Germans, being so much closer to their supply lines, would have a big advantage. And his quoted objective was to, quote, bleed the French white. You know, make them supply way out here. The French knew about Eno, international expert, took his concept that, well, you don't just get in the car and go out there and do the best you can. You regulate the heck out of everything. And they came up with something which they dubbed, I don't speak French, the sacred way. Like a one-way road, 45 miles long or so, not from Paris, but from another place where I guess was their supply depots. And throughout the year of 1916, and I think the Battle of Verdun lasted from February till December, 700,000 casualties, and World War I was just carnage. But the French were not bled dry. The Germans were bled dry, because the French, by using Eno's system of regular traffic control, a one-way street, were able to keep the Verdun forts supplied, and maybe more importantly, to rotate their entire army in and out. So instead of having one division or one regiment sitting there for a year, what they did in other places, every 2 weeks they rotated people out. So basically the whole French army fought at Verdun for some period of time. And they held. And the French really appreciated the idea that Eno had, and they awarded him this. So he continued to be very, very popular in Europe. Elderly there. And tell us about his foundation.
Yeah, well, this was his home, which became the headquarters of the Eno Transportation Organization. It's in the middle of the Saugatuck River, I think in Westport, and it was a beautiful, magnificent home. It's what the wealthy did. You can look at the gardens, you can look at the European influences, and this was in existence. It fell in it's on an island there. I think it's called Sherwood Island, but I'm not sure what the name of the island is. But it fell into disrepair, and it's no longer extant. So, and then this was the building that was found. I'm not sure where that is. I think that was in Westport. That's the first building in the world to be dedicated entirely to highway traffic control. And that was in 1921. He founded the foundation. Its motto is Ex Chao Order, which means out of chaos order. And the original foundation stone for that is on the outside of our library here.
Right, right over there.
Yeah. And it would be called today a think tank, the Eno Foundation. And it has it's always a traffic engineer who heads it up. It's also government relations specialists who staff it. But it is a charity, and it is a think tank. And if there's ever any legislation before the Congress or any committees of Congress on airplanes, airports, trains, cars, trucks, roads, you'll always see that the Eno Foundation is supplying expertise and expert opinions to guide that.
Yeah, and they it's not just highways anymore, airports, seaports, the whole bit. They're like an industry, as T said, think tank. We were in close contact with them for a very long time because, frankly, all of that material back there belonged to them. And we used to store, or they rented it, but they paid us a fee to keep it here, and then finally they donated it. So haven't talked to them in a while, but they seem to be going strong. And so his legacy lives on that way. And again, that's the book that his foundation put out.
If anyone has interest in that, they have a website and they have an email communication system. It's very detailed and very hard to understand. But if you're interested in that,
yeah, it's definitely a traffic nerd's area. And there's the cornerstone that he mentioned.
These are notable Enos, and we know who they are, and we know what they were doing here. Jackson Enos recently left us, but he was one of the last generation in town with the same name all the way through. Gifford Pinchot is perhaps the most famous of the offspring, and he was.
I'll talk about him in some length.
Are you?
Yeah, in a
Okay.
minute.
Okay. William Phelps Eno?
There he is, handsome devil.
Here are the grandkids. You can't beat them.
Is that his wife?
That is William Phelps Eno's wife, correct?
Right. And he, if I remember correctly, he didn't marry until he was 40, 50 years old, very old, and married a younger, beautiful woman who I think died prematurely. I also kind of remember that it was at a time when seances were in vogue, and there was situations where they were trying to contact the people from the other side, and there was some involvement with that. Again, I'm not an expert on it. All right, let's jump back to the overview PowerPoint. And Gifford Pinchot. If we were in Pennsylvania, Gifford Pinchot's name would be very familiar. It's a gigantic park down there, and he was the governor, two-term governor, I think, of Pennsylvania. And even though he was basically a Pennsylvanian, he was born in Simsbury. He was born across the street. And the reason for that was that one of Mary Jane Phelps and Amos R. Eno's children, named Mary Jane Eno, married a guy named Pinchot, who came from a very wealthy, excuse me, establishment family in Pennsylvania. And now the Pinchots, and there's a great book about them, maybe more than you want to know, but we have that in stock if you're interested. Kind of like the Enos, they came from Europe, they settled here, and they made a lot of money. And while they became kind of famous for a store in New York for what we call interior decorating and fine art and all, basically they made their money by clear-cutting a huge part of northeast Pennsylvania. Now, Gifford Pinchot's grandfather, I think, drove that train. His father was sympathetic to Gifford's idea that, gee, you know, we should do something about this. We can't just cut the trees down and not do anything about it. And so he became a dedicated conservationist at a time when Teddy Roosevelt was the president, conservation was getting off the ground, and he was very, very influential. He was a friend and an ally of Teddy Roosevelt. I think he had a brother in politics who was even closer. Whoops. What happened here? I guess you have to keep tapping it.
Set up this slideshow.
But anyway, as he grew up, he decided he wanted to become a forester. And the problem was that there was no such profession in the United States. So he went to France for a year, studied the science of forestry, came back, and with the real money they had, they endowed the Yale School of Forestry, which still exists. You don't think of Yale and a forestry school, but it's been there for quite a while now. And Gifford had the approach that made such sense to a lot of people, and that was kind of a middle ground. On the one hand, you had the John Muirs of the world saying, don't touch the trees. And on the other hand, you had the paper companies saying, let me at it. So he tried to preach responsible development, getting the most out of it for the most people, most of the time kind of thing. And as sometimes happens to people who try to walk the middle ground, he got killed from both sides politically. He was a friend of Roosevelt's, but when Roosevelt had the falling out and Taft became the president, Taft basically fired him. And one of the reasons they gave was that this newfangled Park Service, which Teddy had created, kind of by executive order, we'd say these days, I'm not sure precisely, but it didn't go through Congress. It's not the Park Service, the Forest Service, distinct entities. That there were tremendous forest fires out west in Idaho, Montana, and all that. We've had an author here talking about the Big Burn. And that was kind of the excuse that they used to kick Pinchot out of the head of the Forest Service, saying, hey, what are you guys doing? You should be protecting the forest from fires. All right, so that's how that ended. His family lived in a place called Gray Towers in Pennsylvania, and we've been there recently. And in 1962, his children decided that they would take the mansion at Gray Towers and donate it to the federal government and establish an institute for conservation, which is, again, like the Eno Transportation Institute, is kind of a think tank. It's in Washington. They are very pro-conservation, pro-environmental protection, et cetera, et cetera. And TJ can tell you something interesting, though, about Gray Towers and about some of the Pinchot folks.
Yeah, and
because there's a bit of a scandal here that we should know about.
The Pinchot family was very wealthy. They were wealthy because they were in the forestry business. They were in the forestry business as harvesting timber for construction and other uses, but there's no question about it. Their method was clear cutting, just as Jim said. It's a beautiful place. It's on the Delaware River. The forestry harvesting took place there because they dumped the logs in the Delaware River Gap and brought them down to the urban area where they could be put into lumber use. We had an opportunity to have a relative of Gifford Pinchot named B.B. Gaston come here and speak to us, and I think her tape is still on our website, still on the Simsbury Community Television website, but she was a fascinating author. She wrote a book called The Most Beautiful Woman in the World, which was a relative of theirs, and so at the conclusion of her remarks, and she still is connected to Gray Towers, but at the conclusion of her remarks, she told us a story, and it's in her book. She told us a story about a woman named Mary Pinchot Myers, who was a cousin of hers. And Mary Pinchot Myers, it's been proven, kept company with John F. Kennedy when he was president. And it's a difficult story, but she was murdered on the Ohio Canal Path in Washington, D.C. by someone who was never found, or they tried to, they had a suspect, but they tried to convict him, and he got off because he should have. But she was John F. Kennedy's consort, and in 1962, as a favor and a tribute to her, he pulled a Teddy Roosevelt and dedicated Gray Towers as a national monument. No act of Congress, no appropriation, no nothing. And there are videos of President Kennedy there dedicating that piece of land. And it's a fabulous house to visit. It's in period style. It's obviously a great house of great wealthy people. Interestingly enough, this statue that I pointed out of Amos Areno, when we walked there at the tour we went on, I poked a friend and I said, I've seen that before, but the cast for that is there. So the statue's here and the cast is there. That's how close the families were.
We have a picture of it in the back room too, hanging on the wall.
Yeah.
Picture of Gray Towers if you want to see it.
Yes. And Gray Towers, is a French-style home, master home, but at the peak, there's a little resting place for a statue, and the statue is of Napoleon. And I said, well, what's that? And they said, well, you know, it became, the time that Americans started visiting Europe so much was after the Napoleon conquest.
What I remember about Gray Towers was the outdoor dining table around a, I'll call it a fountain or whatever, but a thing of water, and you want to pass me the salt, a little boat. TJ said that's decadence right there.
They weren't motorized, so they just had to push them.
All right, anyway. We talk about another famous Simsbury person, and that is Senator McLean. We all know the McLean home and McLean refuge, et cetera, and there's a really terrific book about him, Connecticut Yankee Goes to Washington, by a great nephew. Anyway, this gentleman was here a year or two ago, and up at the McLean facility, and did an author talk, and fascinating, well done. Kind of like some of the Enos, he was born in Simsbury, a farm boy, became a journalist, became a lawyer, a very successful lawyer, a Republican politician, became the U.S. attorney for Connecticut, and he went on to become the governor, and he went on to become a 3-term senator. Also a progressive era reformer, an ally of Teddy Roosevelt, and he took some action that really changed the law in a couple of ways. He was concerned about migratory birds and the hunting of them and all of that good stuff, and was anxious to get some regulation in place to conserve the birds and to do it responsibly. And if I remember correctly, they passed a couple of laws in Congress to try to do that. And each time, the people who were against that statute went into court and argued that under the 10th Amendment, not one you hear about every day, the federal government really didn't have the authority to do that regulation. And the 10th Amendment, if you recall, says, look, certain rights or authorities are given to the federal government, Congress in Article 1, President in Article 2, Judiciary, all 3. But if it's not in there, then it's reserved to the states and the people. So for many years, there were many things that the federal government regulates today that would be unheard of then. McLean and his companions figured out that if they couldn't get a law passed, maybe they could get a treaty, which would trump a regular statute. So they entered into negotiations with the United Kingdom, who then handled Canada's external affairs, and they signed this migratory bird treaty. Pursuant to that, Congress passed the law. Same people sued and said, hey, you can't do that. Now, Missouri versus Holland. Missouri didn't sue the country of the Netherlands. That's a guy named Holland who was the federal official in charge of implementing the law. And the Supreme Court of the United States, in no less a personage than Oliver Wendell Holmes, wrote an opinion that said, no, you know, that because it's a treaty, it trumps the normal statute, so it's the law of the land. And as to this 10th Amendment thing, well, you know, we have to look at the Constitution, and he didn't use these words, but it was the first time anybody had really put this into a Supreme Court decision as a living document. I don't know what it meant in 1820, but in 1920, it means that Congress we have a national interest in regulating migratory birds. So that kicked off a period when the living Constitution, living document concept really took hold. And if you think about all of the New Deal regulation in the 30s. Every time Congress would pass a law granting the federal government some power, somebody would sue, say you can't do that, that belongs to the states, and the Supreme Court would say, well, man, not really, not anymore, blah, blah, blah. Go with civil rights, right? Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. The folks who were for school segregation said, wait a minute, when the 14th Amendment was adopted, we had segregated schools, nothing's changed. I mean, the Constitution's still a Constitution. The Supreme Court said, no, it's evolved, it's evolved. Yes?
I'd like to know who thought they'd get a lecture on the Constitution tonight.
So I should wrap it up?
No,
Let
no,
me get
no.
to the good part.
No, no.
So then you race up to the 1960s, and through the living Constitution concept, the Supreme Court found a right to privacy in the Constitution, which doesn't say that, but you can infer from this part, that part, that part, that there's a right to privacy, at least in certain situations. And 10 years later, kind of based on that, they said, well, you know, in the Constitution, there basically is a right to an abortion. States can't prohibit it. Roe v. Wade, a big deal, very controversial. 50 years later, Supreme Court now has people who aren't living Constitution people. They're originalists. Used to be called original intent or strict construction people, but they're originalists. And they say, in so many words, that the Constitution should be interpreted according to the original public meaning at the time it was adopted. Judges should not update or revise constitutional meaning. Changes should come through amendments, not judicial interpretation. So the pendulum has swung way over, and we'll see where it all goes. They did go out of their way in that case to say that really kind of only applies here, but we'll see. But it just shows you how it goes back and forth.
Let me get back to the senator for a second.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Senator McLean's family was part of that diaspora from Great Britain. His father and his grandfather were congregational ministers. His uncle had founded a seminary which was reputed in the town of, in the area and in the region, that was on Seminary Hill. That's why Seminary Hill is called Seminary Hill. The bottom was seminary. Where's that? What George P. McLean, and one thing I want to note about George P. McLean and these Enos, we still got them. George McLean's tomb is right at the top of Plank Hill. Once you get the flat spot, if you go in 50 yards, it's right there. It's a lovely stone with a little bench that McLean put there that you can sit and contemplate there. But he's buried there. And the Enos are in the mausoleums up there. And the mausoleums have Tiffany windows and Tiffany glass. I mean, they're beautiful, and they're obviously places for very significantly wealthy people. The most significant thing that McLean did, and I talked about their philanthropy, but McLean was a naturist. He loved it. He had no children. And so he created the McLean Game Refuge, which is 4,000 acres. 3,000 acres almost in Granby, 1,000 acres in Simsbury. And it's operated by McLean. McLean operates as both the continuum of care facility and also the game refuge, but in the 1,000 acres of Simsbury. They operate them together. The conservation is pure, and there's a fellow named Connor Hogan who's the steward of that land, another Yale Forestry School graduate that was very, very significant. The magnitude of the benefit of the benefactorship of the Enos and the McLeans is overwhelming. Interestingly enough, Jim mentioned the books in the back there. I picked up a book one day. They're in loose leaf files and they're copies, and I saw a letter from Senator McLean to one of the Enos saying, you know, I understand the coal strike is very difficult on Simsbury these days. So they were collegial friends and discussed many things, many ways.
Can I just make one interjection? The windows in the tombs were originally Tiffany, but there was a period of time when they were stolen, so they are replicas of Tiffany windows at this point in time.
Thank you.
But that should be, you don't want people thinking we still have Tiffany windows just hanging out there, but they were at one point. They originally
Look
were.
very closely when you go there and see what you can
And they're
figure out.
beautiful, but.
We through with the senator?
Listen, also with respect to those people in their time, they were extremely powerful, they were wealthy, they were powerful. We know that with respect to McLean, we know that Coolidge came here to visit him, Taft came here to visit him, and Tony Roosevelt came here to visit her. We know that later than that, President Eisenhower and President Reagan visited Simsbury up at the tower. And with respect to wealth and the Gilded Age's people, they were like the Dodges, Phelps Dodge, the great mining company. The Dodges were from Simsbury. The Highlines were from Simsbury. We're going to have a talk about the Highline Tower, which should be
Next week.
really good. And they all had badges of wealth. They had paintings and mansions. And it was very interesting that they, well, it was not interesting, but it was happenstance that they all ended up in Simsbury.
One more word about the Constitution. This was all pre the 16th Amendment, which brought in the income tax. The good old days. Take a second or two to talk about Ensign Bickford, and we're going to have a whole session on that wonderful company coming up. See some of their buildings down the street here. Simsbury is one of the oldest companies in the country, I think, founded in 1836. You don't get much older than that. It's still privately owned, and we still are in close contact with some of the folks who are the descendants of the original founders and all. And as you probably know, their original mission or original business involved safety fuses. There was a copper mine in Simsbury, which at the time was a Simsbury, which was the first commercial copper mine in the United States. They'd found copper other places, but mining was pretty dangerous. So when they tried to blast the ore out, it was by putting down black powder and here, why don't you light it? I'll be over there watching. You know, it wasn't controlled on the burn. So. Anyway, through various patents, et cetera, they became really the world's leading provider of safety fuses. And they've been in here in Simsbury ever since. And we have their books and records in the downstairs.
Were there fuses used during the Civil War?
Sorry?
Were there fuses used during the Civil War? That's 1836.
I'm sure they were, yeah. As well, we'll see when we have that session. There are several things down there that relate to the defense industry, especially World War I, World War II, banners and help win the war and all that good stuff. So, yeah, they were definitely involved in that. So, to sum up a little bit, Free Library with Outreach, as I mentioned when we started, we're very anxious to be active in the community. And over the years, we've had book clubs and certainly author events. These books here, authors them, art shows a couple times a year. We've had films, discussion groups. We've gone on field trips, toured the Farmington Canal, went down to Great Towers, for example. And we have sponsored a bunch of student projects. For many years, published a kind of a scholarly quarterly about local history. The late Mary Jane Springman was a trustee in those days and did all that. And unfortunately, with Mary Jane's passing, we haven't been able to pick that up, although it's a kind of a to-do, some version of it. And I think I mentioned the Canal pamphlet and books and several books on genealogy. About 10, 12, more than that now, maybe close to 20 years ago, I guess, we thought we would reach out and try to work with the local schools more than we had. So there's a picture of us meeting with the then principal of Simsbury High School, and we have engaged in several projects with them, several seminars, one which was a great hit. And I'm really glad we were able to do it. We brought in high school students and a bunch of World War II veterans locally and had a great discussion about World War II in Europe and the Pacific, et cetera, et cetera. The students also made 2 documentaries. One, which was pretty good, but was kind of a student work, pretty clearly, was about the great train wreck in, 1877? on one of those small railroads that took people around in the days that you came out to places like Simsbury to breathe the country air and all. But the bridge, I guess, over the Connecticut River collapsed.
Farmington
There was a
River.
great scandal.
Farmington River.
Farmington River, I should say, Connecticut River. Collapsed and people lost their lives, and it was a great inquiry as to, how could this have happened, et cetera, et cetera. So,
But you can find that on our website or Simsbury Community Media. You can look up the Great Terrific Train Wreck, and it will be available to you.
It's an excellently done short documentary.
it's really good, but it pales in comparison to what happened next. And again, there's another whole session on this. But back in, 12, 14 years ago?
2009. 2009.
2009. In the summer of 2009, Rich Curtis, who was a teacher at Simsbury High School, head of the social studies department, if I remember, had a bunch of high school students, 12, 14, 16, a whole bunch of kids come in here one summer. And as a summertime project, they decided they would try to run down whatever information there might be about Martin Luther King having spent some time in Simsbury. This wasn't a secret, but it was sort of like, yeah, I guess, and nobody took much notice of it. Well, I don't want to, get too much into it because again, there's a whole session on it. But basically, what happened was the kids went out that summer, did lots of interviews, got lots of film, and wound up putting together a 14, 16-minute video on the whole project. And I thought it would be probably something we'd show here as a local event kind of thing. But TJ had some connections in Hartford, and there's a Martin Luther King holiday commission that sponsors everything, and they grabbed a hold of it and used it. It was the cornerstone of the governor's presentation, and they had a black tie dinner, and really a great thing for the kids. And down in New York, somebody in a CBS studio was sitting going through the internet, trying to figure out an angle for the Martin Luther King holiday, sees something about this, comes up, and it was on the CBS National Evening News in the days that Katie Couric was the moderator. So it got tremendous publicity. And it's a real story unto itself, how it was made and all the help the kids got and all the things they did by themselves. Senator Murphy, among others, both senators were there that night. And that's an artist's picture of what's outside under the snow. So just to wrap up, been around a long time. We'd like to use our beautiful building as a focal point for the town's cultural and historical studies. And always looking for a greater understanding of what happened before, so it can help us understand who we are, where we came from, and what it's all about. So again, appreciate you coming in tonight.
Questions?
And we'll look forward to next time.
Anyone have any questions?
Questions or anything, or
Oh, please.
stay around
Yeah,
and
yeah,
wander
yeah.
and talk?
We have a question back here.
I just have one question. The Great Migration, when people came to Simsbury, how in the world did they pick Simsbury? Where were they? Were they coming from England or the Netherlands? Where?
From what I read, this group came in through Boston and then moved down. Followed opportunity, followed the river down. But that's a good question. I'll try to get a better answer by the time we add it again.
Yeah, and I think the Puritans were people who were upset with the Church of England, the Anglican Church. They thought it was too much like Roman Catholicism. They wanted to strip it all down. Very controversial, and a lot of them came here so they could get away from England and the strictures of the Church of England.
We know that Roger Williams brought his colony from Rhode Island, right? And we know that Adrian Block, the Dutch guy, came up the river. And we'll get a better answer. Maybe they realize what a great place it is.
Well, I mean, I have relatives that came from the Netherlands in the 1620s, and they ended up in Long Island. I mean, have you ever just depends on,
They probably went into New York, right?
yes.
No, but, yeah,
Well,
but.
they went to New Jersey then, and then.
Yeah, but Long Island was a fabulous agricultural
Right.
community, which this was. I mean,
Okay.
you know, in the Revolutionary War, we were the provision state. We made things, we invented things, we drew ore and made steel, and that's what we were. And mostly we were farms, but we also had that industrial base. And these Enos, they weren't farmers; they were capitalists.
And we could also, sometimes people lose sight of the fact that New York was a Dutch colony for a long time, New Amsterdam, etc. So might have been why they were there and why they went out to the island. There's a great book called Island at the Center of the World, all about, maybe you've read it, all about Manhattan Island and the Dutch and their influence and how it really kind of pointed the direction for New York, pointing out little things like when the British came in year number one, they built a church. The Dutch came in year number one, they built a bank. Didn't build a church for 37 years or something. So it's kind of a different emphasis because the Puritans were looking for religious freedom and the Dutch were looking for commercial opportunity. Sir?
It's less a question and more of a comment. I could be incorrect, so maybe you would know. I know that Governor McLean's home is on Firetown because my mother was in that nursing home for 20-something years. And the house is still there. It's greatly changed. But across the street, Hot Meadow Country Club, my understanding is that was the farm where he lived, and his mother was there in the barns, or still the original barns?
The main corridor is still there, but none of the, in 1961, let's start at the beginning. That was the governor's house was McLean's residence.
Yeah.
Okay, and then it became a convalescent care facility at that point. I think McLean's wife died in 1950, Goodrich, and he died 10 or 15 years before that. But Hot Meadow Country Club is on a lease from the McLean Foundation. So the McLean Trust owns Hot Meadow Country Club and ground leases it to the private club, which is.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Somewhere in the next couple of weeks, you're going to talk about where Simsbury fits with Windsor and Weathersfield in terms of who was first settled, and did the people from Windsor not like some other people and they moved here over the mountain, or?
Well, there was a period of time when we were all the same piece of land, but
Right.
but we'll do a little bit on that. Happy to.
Oh, good, thank you.
That's of interest.
So I was curious, I get a little confused with all the Eno names and everything, but it seemed
Yeah.
like they made all their money in New York City. Did they stay up here too, or?
No, Amos R. came back to Simsbury every summer. We should have mentioned this. The 1820 house was his summer house. That's where Gifford Pinchot was born because, again, Mary Jane Eno came up to give birth in
But we don't
home.
know where we know Amos Richards Eno was born in Simsbury to Simsbury parents, but I don't know where their house was.
Okay.
The 1820 house was her family's house. And it was the summer residence for the Eno family. They were all in Manhattan.
Right. They were New York. Once he moved to New York, he never moved the whole thing back. Well, I guess Antoinette Eno Wood spent a lot of time up here, right? She was very fond of Simsbury.
And she did in that house, and she had an annual skating party, and she had an annual ice cream social, and she was really quite. And there were a couple other outliers like Fanny Pomeroy Hendricks who were, New Yorkers who summered here. And the train, they summered here. Some of them got here because the train came here.
I was going to tell a cute story. My brother told me this story. I think it's true. But they're talking about Amos Eno was a real estate developer. And my grandfather was a painter in New York City on Wall Street. And he worked for this rich woman. And her friend was Amos Eno. And he was there when my grandfather was painting. And he said, if you ever want to get out of the city, you should come to Simsbury. It's a great town. So my grandfather, when they wanted to leave, they went to Ellington first. And then they found out there's a farm in Simsbury. And he remembered his conversation with and that's, I think, one of the reasons they settled in Simsbury, from that conversation.
And your farm is Rosedale Farm,
Yeah,
for everyone else here.
yeah, yeah.
And it's 100 years old.
1920? Yeah, a little over, yeah. Cute story.
That's a
I
great
hope you all
story.
come back.
That's a great
I
story.
hope we spend some time together. We'd love you to
Thank you.
be interested in our library and come on back and let's talk some more about it. I'd love to hear what other questions you might have.
For over 40 years, SCM has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education, and live broadcasts.
SEM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings,
and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SEM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions, and it's no secret people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SEM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth, and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SEM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
for generations to come.
Visit our website
or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
where your town,
your schools,
and your government come together.